Welcome to the product tutorials on different overtime rules existing in the Replicon system. I'm now logged into the Replicon instance. In this video, we will see what are the different kind of overtime rules available within the Replicon system. In Replicon, there are three kinds of overtime rules existing: simple rules, biconditional rules, and complex rules. Each of these categories have further divisions of overtime rules available. Let's look at each of these one by one. In order to go to overtime rule, go to administration and click on overtime rules available under pay codes and policies. Click on the add overtime rule option available here. Under the template drop-down, you would see all the overtime rules listed. The simple overtime rules consist of single condition rule, daily overtime rule, and weekly overtime rule. The biconditional rules consist of biconditional rule or apply both conditions, biconditional rule or apply condition that yields the highest pay, and biconditional rule and. And lastly, the complex rules consist of California overtime rule and the best of overtime rule. Now let's look at all these rules by one. Let's first look at single condition rule. The employee in this rule is paid overtime if they work over the number of hours that you specify here. The time span can either be a day, as you can see here, or a work week as defined in the user's profile, or the timesheet period itself. For day-based conditions, as we have selected here, you can select whether the rule should apply to the work days, weekly day offs, or holidays, or all the days irrespective. However, if you choose work week, this would go off. If you choose timesheet period, you would not see the option anymore. Choose day and you can also choose the number of hours that each day the user has to work in order to get an overtime. This is how the single condition rule works. Let's look at daily overtime rule. Daily overtime rule, the employee is paid overtime for the hours that he works beyond a number that you specify for one particular day. You can include multiple conditions. Let's look at that. Click on the add button and you would see a condition coming up here. Now you can include multiple conditions, but the employee can only qualify for the overtime based on that one condition each day. That is, any one condition that will yield the maximum pay to the employee. In this rule, you can either click on the add and add number of conditions within for the all days section, or you can click on the add button here and add a different category for the other options available in the drop down. As you click on this add button and add more conditions, the options available for the previous will go off. That is, if all days and holidays have already been chosen, then once you click on add, the drop down would not show all days and holidays anymore. Each condition can apply to one of the followings. It can be all days, it can be holidays, it can be work days, it can be weekly day offs, or any one day of the week. This is how the daily overtime rule will work. Now let's look at weekly overtime rule. In the weekly overtime rule, the employee is paid overtime for the hours that he works beyond a number you specify for one single work week. This work week is as assigned in their user profile. You can here include multiple conditions again, but each overtime hour is only paid overtime based on one condition. So let's take up an example. One condition can pay you overtime, say for example, time and a half for working over 40 hours. And let's add another condition. which can pay you 2 times if you work more than 50 hours. Now, in such a condition, you can either get paid if you work more than 40 hours per week, or you can have a double pay if you work more than 50 hours per week. You can check the option to bank if you would like all of these overtime hours to be banked. Let's move over from simple rules to biconditional rules in Replicon. The first biconditional rule that we will look on is biconditional rule or apply both conditions. In this rule, the employee is paid overtime for both the daily and the work week. Even if only one condition is met, the overtime for that condition will be paid. So if hours will qualify for overtime under both conditions, those hours will be paid at the daily rate. So let's take up an example of an employee entering 9 hours for each day and then going above 40 for the entire work week. Then the employee would qualify for the daily overtime, though he satisfies both the conditions. And if any one of the conditions is fulfilled, then the employee will be paid overtime. Now let's look at the other overtime rule under the biconditional rules, which is biconditional rule or apply condition that yields the highest pay. As the name suggests, the employee is paid only for the condition that will yield the most overtime pay every week. So it can be that employee gets maximum pay out of a daily overtime, or it can be that he gets maximum paid out of work week overtime. However, either one that pays the maximum pay will be selected for the overtime calculation. Let's move over to the last overtime rule under biconditional rules, and that is biconditional rule and. As you can see here, in this rule the employee is paid for the daily condition, but he will be paid for the daily condition only if the work week condition is met. That is, an employee may work 9 hours for one day. However, if he has not worked more than 40 hours for the week, that one day of 9 hours will not be paid as overtime to the employee. This is how biconditional rules work. Now let's move over to our complex rules. Coming to the first complex rule, which is the California overtime rule. The California overtime rule consists of 3 sections: daily overtime, work week, and the 7th consecutive day overtime. This rule will employ or involve multiple conditions, and in daily you can assign 2 conditions, in work week you can assign 1, and in the 7th consecutive day you can assign 2 conditions. For each hour of overtime the employee works, they are paid only for the condition that will yield the most pay out of all of these. This is how the California overtime rule works. Now let's move over to the last overtime rule, that is best of overtime. In best of overtime, you can include multiple conditions. Let's click on the add button. As you can see, you can have multiple time frames from daily to holidays to work week to 7th consecutive day to weekly day offs to any one of the day weeks. For each hour of overtime that the employee will work, they will be paid only for the condition that will yield the most pay. So for work week condition, you can choose to include hours worked on holidays. So if I choose work week here, I can obviously say that includes the hours that are worked on holidays within that week. If I uncheck this, then if there exists a holiday within that week, then those hours will be excluded for the overtime calculation. Coming over to the concept of straight time. Straight time is a concept that is used in Replicon to calculate the work week overtime amounts in the overtime rules. and these are specifically based on the best of overtime or California overtime. Basically, the straight time is equal to the task hours that an employee is expected to work within a day. For example, if the employee is required to work 8 hours a day, then you can go ahead, check this box and enter 8 hours here. These will be the straight time. Let's look on why is the straight time necessary. There are two reasons why you would want a straight time to be mentioned. One, this will prevent users from being paid overtime twice for the same hours. Understanding this further, the work week overtime is typically only paid in addition to the daily overtime, as we've already seen that. So without a straight time requirement, hours could qualify both as daily and weekly. So to avoid that, you can have straight time mentioned. The other reason is to prevent users from being paid overtime without working their entire work week. So let's take up an example that an employee with a straight time requirement of 8 hours could not accumulate 40 work week hours by working 10 hours a day for 4 days in a week. They would have to work 8 hours each work day for 5 days before the work week overtime would apply. So this is about all the overtime rules existing within the Replicon system. Thank you for watching the video. Did you know that you can now get in touch with Replicon using Replicon Community? In order to access the Replicon community, go to the Replicon website and click on Customer Zone. On the Customer Zone, choose Community and you would be taken to the community page. Now you can sign in or register and start posting your questions, queries, ideas, bugs, issues, and one of our product management team members or one of the Replicon representative will get in touch with you immediately.